All right, so today I want to talk to you about the power of pre-qualification. Now, the pre-qualification today we're going to be talking about is specifically about pre-qualifying the sellers. Have you ever noticed how some realtors go out and just seem to take every single last listing that they go on an appointment? I'm going to share with you today in regards to some of the ways that they actually do that.
Hi everyone, Robert Villanueva here. Over a buyer's consult. And of course, as always, I'll see you at the top.
All right, welcome back. Now, why do we need to pre-qualify a seller, you might be asking? Here's the thing. Pre-qualification is a series of questions that is going to give you the opportunity to be able to put yourself separated from your competition. It basically sets us apart. How does it set us apart? Well, in most cases, most agents, what they'll basically do is they set an appointment and they just simply go out. But by putting yourself in a position where you're asking a series of questions, it is going to put you in a position where it makes it seem from a seller standpoint that you're trying to do your homework in preparation for that actual appointment. In the pre-qualification, it gives you the opportunity, of course, to identify their motivation. There's two main things. Number one is the motivation. And number two, which is probably the most important part of that, is it gives you opportunity to clarify any potential objections. Now, just imagine if you were in a position that you were taking an exam, you were taking a test, you had all of the answers to the test. Would you want to know them? It's basically the same thing as to with when you are pre-qualifying, because in that pre-qualification, it gives you the opportunity to, again, get you one of two things. Number one, being that of their motivation. And number two, it gives you the opportunity to know what potential objections you may come across. We want to be in a position where we always present based on emotion, because emotion gives us the opportunity to get them to act. Logic, on the other side, gets them to think. We don't want them thinking more. We want them acting more. Now, of course, as always, as I'm continuing to grow this audience, I'm going to ask of you to please comment, like, and of course, subscribe. Most importantly, if you can actually help me grow the audience by sharing it, I'd really appreciate that. Let's move over to the next thing. Now, let's talk about standards. Now, standards are in regards to, well, for that matter, do you have any? Standards are going to be along the line of price, time frame, commissions, and of course, the seller's attitude. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because when we pre-qualify them, are we going to be working with a seller that is going to put us in a position where they're going to be asking way too high of a price? What about somebody that sits there and says, okay, well, I'll give you the listing, but I'll only do it for 2 weeks? Is that going to be enough time? What if they sat there and said, hey, I'm not looking at paying much more than 1% commission, as an example? You want to be able to have some version of standards. And of course, when you're in a position where you're generating enough business, ideally, you're going to be in a position where you don't have to be dealing with certain people's attitude. Okay. Now, that is definitely a standard you're going to want to, of course, take into consideration, because there are clients that are absolutely difficult to work with. And if you're trying to do that for 2,500 bucks, it's obviously going to be a little bit different than if it's going to be $25,000. So you want to be in a position where you're setting some version of standards. Okay. Now, what questions do you ask in the prequal? Well, my personal favorite, my mentor is Mike Ferry. And I basically just use his pre-qualification. It's a series of questions, which are 10 questions that you're going to ask. Now, in those 10 questions, they're very, very specific. But what you want to do in those 10 questions is it's going to give you the opportunity to ask additional questions based on, of course, with what they answer, which we'll talk about in just a second. But in that, you want to go through, identify all of the information as much as you possibly can in advance. Now, let's talk about when do you do this. Ideally, you're going to want to do this within a 24 to 48-hour window in advance. Okay. Now, that's not going to happen with every single one of them, but that's going to be the most ideal. There is an exception to that. My personal exception is if it's an expired. You set an expired listing appointment. That expired listing appointment is today. then what you're going to do is you're going to pre-qualify them on the spot. In other words, would today at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock work better? 4 o'clock? Perfect. Now, before I come over, let me ask you a few quick questions before I arrive. And you're just going to jump right into the prequel. If you find yourself, and every once in a while, I mean, maybe once a year, maybe twice a year at the absolute most, you'll find yourself in a position where it's like, okay, look, we're interviewing realtors right now. If you want to come over, come on over, because I gotta head out to the airport here in the next half hour, an hour, 2 hours, whatever it may be. Maybe a half hour, an hour is probably a little unrealistic. But if you have to go almost immediately, it doesn't give you the opportunity to pre-qualify. What I want you to do is before you begin your presentation, you're going to want to pre-qualify. Again, remember, the reason we pre-qualify is, of course, to set you apart from your competition, but most importantly is to get the motivation and to identify any potential objections. Now, why do we do this? The reason we do this is because it gives you the opportunity to be able to present from a different perspective. If you have a certain objection, for example, we're only looking at hiring a realtor that is going to charge us 1%, being a little sarcastic, but let's just use that as an example. It gives us the opportunity when we're presenting to say things along the line of, you're going to sprinkle it in. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, there are many realtors that are out there to choose from. And there are some realtors where all they want to do is just simply be the cheapest realtor. However, I, on the other hand, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is I focus on making the sellers the most amount of money. Were you looking for the cheapest realtor or for the realtor that's going to make you the most amount of money? Yeah, exactly. Now, let's jump right back into the presentation. You didn't say anything about you wouldn't take the commission of 1%, or you're fighting for the commission of 6 or 7% as an example. You're not saying anything negative from anything else, but what you did is you just dropped a subtle line that gives you the opportunity to move the presentation forward. And then by the time you get to the end, sometimes the objection is no longer an objection because they see so much value in you. So in that, how do we create this value? How do we put ourselves in a position where we can present so well in order for us to get, of course, a better opportunity to get that listing? Well, what we're going to want to do is, of course, you're going to want to practice and you're going to want to role play. You're going to want to go over all of these different scenarios, including different personality styles. When I'm presenting, it's a little bit of a difference. And I'm not saying in regards to the words. Sometimes it could be the tone, it could be the pace, it could be just simply my body language, it could be the amount of empathy I have as to the different personality styles. If I'm speaking to a driver, I'm going to be very direct, right to the point. Let's get this over with. But if it's an amiable personality, then there's probably going to be things along the lines of emotions. How do you feel? I'm sure, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that you want the best family for your home, correct? There are going to be things along the line, which, of course, even as you heard me say it, the tone in my voice with so much empathy, it gives you the opportunity to become masterful in your presentation by simply practicing and, of course, role playing. And when you're going over the different scenarios as you're role playing in practice, it gives you the opportunity to be able to identify when you're presenting to a driver, an amiable, an expressive, or how about an analytical? When you're dealing with an analytical, it is way different as an example than a driver. Not that one is good or bad or anything like that. It's just with who they are. But when you're dealing with, for example, an analytical, you're probably going to say things along the line of, as a matter of fact. Okay. Now, as I did all of my research, okay, I'm sure you want all of the facts and figures in order for you to make a decision, don't you? With a driver, I'm going to say things along the line of, I'm sure you want it to be as quick and easy and as painless as possible, right? Let's get right to the point. Do you see what I'm saying? With these basically little subtle statements, it gives you the opportunity to be able to present subject to whoever you're actually speaking with. As a coach, when I'm working with a coaching client that is basically listing appointment to listing take-in ratio, let's use an example. Somebody goes on 10 listing appointments. They come back with 5 listings taken. That is what is known as a 50% listing appointment to listing take-in ratio. Well, As a coach, I know how to actually get somebody from 50 to 60 to 70, even up to 80%, meaning that if we work on certain things over an extended period of time, I can help an agent go from 50% to even as high as 80. And even in some cases, I've, been able to have the good fortune of getting people to 90%. How do we do this? There's three things that will immediately impact the listing appointment listing taken ratio. Number one is your ability to pre-qualify and how thorough you are. Number two is going to be that as to your listing presentation. And number three is basically your ability to close, which is your closing skills. So again, your basically pre-qualification, listing presentation, and number three being your closing skills. As I go through and ask a coaching client, of those three things, which do you think is the most impactful to get your listing appointment to listing taken ratio? What do you think? Most people, in most cases, will say closing skills, which is actually the wrong answer. Some people will say listing presentation skills, which is also the wrong answer. The right answer is actually pre-qualification. Let me explain why. Now, I'm not saying the other two are not important. Of course they are. Okay, they're absolutely important. But if we were to put a weight or percentile in regards to of the three things, which is the most important is pre-qualification. Here's why. The reason for that is as we gather information, it gives us the opportunity to be able to become a better presenter. And in that presentation, the natural ending to a great presentation is simply just asking for the signature. No objection handling, no closing. All we need to do now is simply sign the contracts that can help you get down to San Diego before the summer. Won't that be great? Perfect. Do me a favor. Go ahead and sign right there. I mean, how hard is that closing? Okay. You don't have to become this masterful closer. You need to become a masterful presenter. But in order for you to become a masterful presenter, you have to have the information which you're going to be presenting on. If you don't pre-qualify, you're going to be shooting from the hip. Have you ever found yourself being in a position where you basically back yourself up into the corner? Meaning you go through, you do a presentation, and then you don't know what to say. Part of the reason why you find yourself being in this corner of not knowing what to say is because you didn't pre-qualify. Again, remember, we pre-qualify to get the motivation. I can say things along the line at the very end when sellers say things as an example. We're going to think about it. I can say, great, you're absolutely right. This is a really big decision. However, the decision must be made based upon with what it is that you want. And again, that's to get down to San Diego by the summer. So let's think out loud. Come on, tell me. Three minds are better than two. What are you guys thinking about? I don't know. We just want to think about that. Hey, you know what? I get it. I totally understand where you're coming from. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, let me do this. I just want to take a minute to apologize. Why are you apologizing? Well, here's the thing, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. It's usually by this time, sellers are asking me, where do they sign? And I'm a little bit confused because, you're finding yourself in a position you want to think about it. In my presentation, somewhere I lost you. Was it the price? No. Was it the commissions? No, we're okay with that. I mean, was it me? Well, I don't know, Robert. We have other options. I get that, and I understand. So somewhere in there, I lost you, and it must have been something that I said. Or, for that matter, something the other agent, if I'm competing, said that maybe I didn't say. What this basically is it's what's called an isolation close. And it gives me the opportunity to be able to go back. Now, going back to, as the example, using the motivation, I can actually go back and say, well, I'm under the impression you wanted to get down to San Diego, right? And you also mentioned to me that you wanted to be there by the summertime. You also mentioned to me that the reason why you want to get down there is to be closer to your parents. Now, as far as seeing your parents now, you mentioned to me that you only see them ever so often. How are they going to feel if we continue to postpone this? Yeah, I'm sure they're not going to like it, but they will like it if we actually get your property sold and get you down there sooner rather than later, right? Let's do the right thing. I'm the right agent. Let's get the job done. Let's go ahead and do the right thing. Let's go ahead and sign the contract. This gives us the opportunity to be able to come back, like as I'm talking about, where you revert back into that corner, you can actually come back by simply talking about their motivation. It doesn't always work. but at least you now have something to your arsenal versus, well, yeah, you're right. It is a big decision. You know what? Why don't we do this? Let me check back with you on Monday and then we can take it from there. That's not closing. That's giving up. And you're basically telling me that you're a powerful closer. So those are things that I want you to really pay attention to. And that's something that you can role play. And of course, you can always be in a position where you're practicing. Now, let's talk a little bit about the importance of motivating questions, as I just mentioned here just a second ago of the motivating questions. The motivating questions will always be about them. Motivating questions are going to be along the line of who, what, when, where, why, how, and if. We've talked about this in other videos. So when we start with questions that start with that, it gives us the opportunity to ideally move the question on them. Now, again, when we're presenting, we want to talk less about us and more about them. So the more motivation we have, the more information about the motivation that they have, the better we can be able to present. And for that matter, even close. Who's most excited about making this move? Who in your family is waiting for you when you make the move over to San Diego? What is so important about making this move? Why is this move so important for you and your family? Where exactly is it that you're wanting to move to? Now, how is this going to impact you and your family? Those are just kind of examples. You can come through which one what I've shared in other videos is to be able to be in a position where you can ask or have to your arsenal 5 who questions, 5 what questions, 5 when questions, so on and so forth. So that way you can have a series of some of these questions to the ready. Now let's move on to the next point. The next point is you now get the opportunity to pick if you want to work with these sellers or even if it's a listing that you want. This is the benefit of pre-qualifying. Now, what am I talking about? Well, what I'm basically talking about is that sometimes we go on these listing presentations and you're just like, yeah, this is no way that this house is worth this amount. No way I'm going to work on with this type of seller. No way am I going to be in a position where I'm going to take this listing at a 2 or 3% discount. No way am I going to, work with a seller that's only going to give me a month to sell this home. Whatever those things are, it gives you the opportunity to be able to gather the information, make a decision. And if, for that matter, if it's something that may be in the pre-qualification, you could just simply say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, our appointment for tomorrow at 5 o'clock, based on the questions I asked, it's probably best for us not to meet. It's probably best that I actually refer you to another agent. It's probably best that maybe we revisit this at a later time. That's the purpose, of course, of pre-qualifying, because every once in a while you'll sit there and say, if what I say makes sense and you feel comfortable and confident, are you planning to list your home with me when I come out tomorrow at 5 o'clock? And they say, no, we're not ready yet. We're probably thinking about doing this in about another 6 months from now. Well, then what's the point of coming out today? It's happened. So I want you to think about that. Okay, now this is a little bit of a shorter video. I'm going to go into more about this on how to actually go through, of course, more on the strategy side of things. And I want to be able to go over that in a different video. I'm hoping these videos are being, of course, helpful to you. I'm going to ask of you, as I did previously, to, of course, comment, like, most importantly, subscribe. But I do want you to help me grow the audience by sharing. As always, hopefully these videos are helpful. Your favorite coach here, Robert Villanueva. I'll see you at the top.
Hi everyone, Robert Villanueva here. Over a buyer's consult. And of course, as always, I'll see you at the top.